Welcome to the Laverne Church of the Brethren's weekly audio message. Here at the Laverne Church of the Brethren, we create a Christian community called by Christ to be inclusive, caring, and peace-minded. We affirm that people of any race, ethnic identity, gender identity, sexual orientation, ability, age, economic status, faith tradition, or life situation are welcome in our congregation. We believe in compassionate service, stewardship of creation, respect for diversity, and nonviolent reconciliation for differences among all people, nations, and faith traditions. We claim no creed but the New Testament as exemplified by the life of Christ. We strive to follow the way of Jesus. And through these efforts, we seek to grow ever closer to the mind and heart of God. And now let us ground ourselves as we enter into today's message.
Hear now these words from Luke 10:25-37. An expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." But wanting to vindicate himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and took off, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was coming down the road, and when he saw him, he passed on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling came upon him, and when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, treating them with oil and wine. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise."
Thank you, Nancy, for your assistance in worship today. Thank you, Randy, for the music and the trumpet. There we go. Thank you for the trumpet. Oh, I love this act or symbol of appreciation in this congregation. Thank you. So gifted. It was in 2020 that "Be Kind" sign was nailed to a porch post just across from the church in Westminster, Maryland, where I was serving. Within a short time, these "Be Kind" signs began appearing all over town, on telephone posts, in windows, even out on the freeway. As I would go back and forth from Baltimore to the airport, I would see "Be Kind" signs. Their uniqueness and color caught my attention. Their shape as a crayon caught my attention. I mean, a crayon. There's no more imaginative tool or thing to use that sparks one to think. And so then to emboss this simple message, "Be kind," on a crayon was even more evoking of thought and curiosity. But its unique message and shape caught my attention, and I dare say that it caught the attention of other drivers or passerbyers with its simple message, "Be kind." These signs were the brainchild of Eric Miller. It was in January of 2020 that he had been reading and hearing and listening to the news and was just inundated with negativity. And it was weighing on his spirit. And so Eric wanted to counter that message. And he wanted something that would remind him that everything is better when you're in the presence of kindness, when you're around people who are empathetic. Things are better. And so he made this sign, one for himself, but then also for the community at large, to be reminded of what we could be. That's how the Infinite Love Project began. It was a small, genuine offer of kindness by Eric. He was known as the Chesapeake Craftsman, but also the Yoga Whisperer. And it was out of his yoga experience that I think he was inspired by this notion of kindness. See, Eric wanted to live and lean into his seve, is that right? It's a word that arises from his Sikh tradition and the Hinduism tradition that speaks of kindness. Its root word is to serve selflessly. That was Eric's intention and goal. So this idea of being kind meshes very well with our scripture lesson today, the story of the Good Samaritan. The story of the Good Samaritan is synonymous with kindness and love and acts of care. And that's where I go, and that's where I went when I began with this text. But then as I began studying and reading, I began to wonder, is there something more that I need to learn here? This is just too easy. Be kind. Is there something more? And in beginning to wrestle with that question, I discovered the writing of Amy Jill Levine. There were 2 books that I found by her that had wonderful reflections on the Good Samaritan. And she put it in the context of a Jewish tradition, or in Jesus' tradition, what it would have meant for Jesus and those who heard this story. But her books are entitled The Misunderstood Jew, The Church and the Scandal of the Jewish Jesus, and secondly, Short Stories by Jesus. And in these books, she invites the readers to consider that this notion of being kind has domesticated this parable. It's domesticated Jesus in the sense of what the hearers in Jesus' day, how they would have heard this story. Now, there's nothing wrong with kindness. There's nothing wrong with empathy. We need it. But this story has been used in so many ways to denigrate the Jewish community. It's become an anti-Jewish story. Be a good Samaritan. But let's stop and pause for a minute about Good Samaritan. The context of this is we need to go back to chapter 9 in Luke's gospel. And there, Jesus finds himself in Samaria. And Jesus is rejected in Samaria. He's not welcomed. And so he leaves. And then he tells a story of a Samaritan that's been labeled good. Now, wait a minute. In this context, or what just happened with Jesus, the Samaritans were Jesus' enemy. They didn't care for Jesus. But yet now Jesus tells a story of a kind act of a Samaritan. But that's not all. Parables. What are the intent of parables? Levine points out that parables are meant to surprise us and to shock us. So when I start reading this story, it's so familiar that it's lost its shock value. And so Levine puts it in perspective. She says to understand the parable in theological terms, we need to see the image of God in everyone, not just members of our group. And to hear this parable in contemporary terms, we should think of ourselves as the person in the ditch. How many of us, well, I know myself when I read this story, I want to see myself as a Samaritan. And on my bad days, I know that I'm the priest and the Levite. I miss opportunities. But I haven't often put myself in the ditch. But here, Levine offers us to hear the story in that way. We're the ones in the ditch. And so she poses this question, or questions, as we find ourselves in the ditch. Is there anyone from any group about whom we would rather die than acknowledge she offered help or he showed compassion? Is there anyone that we wouldn't take their hand if they were reaching out to us to lift us up? Or is there any group whose members might rather die than help us? Added a different twist or thought to thinking about kindness in this story. But then she goes further. She puts the parable in its context. The ancient kingdom of Samaria is the West Bank. The man in the ditch is an Israeli Jew, a rabbi and a Jewish member of the Israeli Knesset failed to help the wounded man. But a member of Hamas shows him compassion. Now, can you imagine the story told in that way? Levine suggests if this story was heard within the Middle East, it might offer hope and peace. If we lean into the surprise of the story. In a similar spirit to Levine, Debbie Thomas brings the surprise and twist of this parable even closer to home, as she imagined the characters in the story in this way. A progressive Democrat is robbed, and a far-right Republican saves her life. A racist white cop is robbed, and an African-American teenager saves his life. A transgender woman is robbed, and an anti-LGBTQ activist saves her life. Or an outspoken atheist is robbed, and a Bible-thumping fundamentalist saves his life. An ICE agent is robbed, and an undocumented immigrant saves his life. You hear the power of this story when we put it in a different context, or our context? I mean, it takes us back to the lawyer's question. Who is my neighbor? I mean, the lawyer's question was one, instead of expanding the circle and meaning of neighbor, was trying to constrict it to mean only those closest to me. But in this parable, as Levine and Debbie Thomas point out, your neighbor is the one who scandalizes you with compassion. Your neighbor is the one who upends all the entrenched categories and shocks you with the fresh face of God. You know, who do we see God in? Your neighbor is the one who mercifully steps over the ancient bloodied line separating us from them. Those separations don't matter, and teaches us the real meaning of goodness and kindness and empathy. You see, when you're the one in the ditch, what matters is not whose help you would prefer, or if the faith of the one reaching out to lift you up holds the same faith as you do, or if they hold the same political views as you. Those aren't questions we ask when we're in the ditch and a hand comes out to us. We grab on. See, what matters is whether or not anyone will stop and show us mercy and extend that hand. Otherwise, the odds may not be forever in our favor. So, who is our neighbor? How are we being a neighbor? And how does that impact us when we're finding ourselves in a ditch? I was struck by the words of Stephen Shakespeare, who offers this prayer in his book, Prayers for the Inclusive Church. He prays and invites us to pray. God of bandit places, love that demands our all, reveal to us our wounds and give us grace to know our neighbors, tending us with foreign hands. God just wants to hold our hand. The question is will we take hold and see God in the face of the one who's seeking to help? May we learn to be kind and to accept kindness in our own life. Christ reminds us that being a neighbor to others calls us to show mercy and kindness to those in need. So may we go from this place and do likewise, comforting others because you know what it means to cry, loving others because you know what it means to be left out and behind. Even when it isn't easy, we're called to be tender and kind, especially when it isn't easy. And as you go, may you go with courage, knowing that the God who created you, the Christ who guides you, and the Spirit who moves in and through you goes forth with you. Go knowing that the loving guides will be your guides, and the tender ones will hold you by the hand. Let us go forth in peace.
We're so glad that you listened to the message today. If you're looking for an open and affirming, peace-loving, and justice-seeking congregation, consider visiting us for in-person worship on Sundays at 9:30 a.m. We'd love to meet you.